Hey guys, and welcome to Quality Shot. As you can tell, a little bit of a group discussion. I won't call it a debate because I don't think that's the right word for it, but a discussion on the Azeem Rafiq inquiry and just giving you a little bit of information on it for those who haven't really kept up to date with it as well. Not just talking and discussing about the consequences of it, but we'll talk a little bit about what's happened, the findings from the case, and also, a couple of the stories that have come out probably maybe soften some of the stories a little bit potentially, but we'll see depending on how horrendous they are. And then we'll talk about it. I mean, obviously we're all British Asians, so we can probably talk a little bit if we want to on like relating to it as well, potentially. And then also what's come out of this, whether we think there's going to be any change and what we think should happen, ECB, etc. as well, and the county cricketers, etc. First of all, before we get into that, Aaron, Gan, and Cash, are you guys all okay?
Yeah, very good.
The solemn nod. It's a serious topic. It is. Cash, I'll start off with you then first. I mean, it happened about over a year ago, and some of the fines. I mean, I know you've done quite a bit of reading on it as well. I mean, what has been your, I guess, a little bit of analysis on what's happened so far?
I mean, I think, if you look at Azeem's kind of career, and he's looking at it on the long scope of being at Yorkshire Cricket, County Cricket Club for a long time, having been on 2 spells, so he went away for I think a year or 2, had to come back, partly because he needed to make money, and he needs to support his wife and his family, but then to realize actually that the environment was still terrible, was still toxic, and to try and change something, right? And the fact that it took them a year just for the thing to come out, so if for people who don't know, they went and got an independent investigation done, which was then fed back to Yorkshire, to the Yorkshire County, who then sat on it effectively, and they redacted names and they did all this kind of stuff.
So just some clarification, because I think you sounds like you've done a little bit more than me. So I was under the impression, and it sounds like it's different, that Yorkshire took it upon themselves to do their own inquiry, but they did actually get external people to audit themselves, right?
Yeah.
That's what. So they did actually do that. Okay, fine. Sorry, Karen.
Yeah. So it was an external. I'm not sure who they were. Some investigation company, who fed it back to Yorkshire, and Yorkshire sat on it effectively, saying, "Oh, we have to go through it and redact it and whatever," but effectively looking for the best time that they could sweep it under the carpet. And what the best time was the cancelled England-India game at Old Trafford, and that's when they announced it. And they I don't even think they released the whole investigation, right? They released elements of it, and effectively it's still to now, until Lord Patel came in, which was last week, were in denial. They were effectively in denial, and it's kind of snowballed into a national crisis. It's got to a point where the sports minister is talking about independent regulation. They're talking about cutting all the funds. They're talking about a massive crisis for the ECB, who also have absolutely failed to handle any of this, as well as the players, the PCB as well, the PCA, I think, sorry, Players Association. So there's a lot going on. It's a huge crisis. I think Azeem has been very courageous and has really developed a lot of, he's come and he's not just said what's gone wrong with him, but he's shown how it connects to a very, very wide network of discrimination and exclusion. And it's horrifying, but it's not shocking for a lot of people, particularly people who aren't white. But to be honest, I would think a lot of white players wouldn't be that shocked either. They might be surprised that it meant such a great deal to the Asian players. But I don't think they would be surprised that it was going on.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think a good, not to just shock people, but I think obviously for background on people who don't know who Azeem Rafiq is as well, he's, as Cash said, played for Yorkshire a couple of times in 2 stints. In between that at Derbyshire. Derbyshire couldn't afford him, which is why then he went to Yorkshire. Again, despite obviously the racism and discrimination that he was subject to. So he went back there basically because his livelihood, that's his job. Maybe thought he'd come into a dressing room where there'd been change. I think initially there was with Jason Gillespie from what he said. But then after with Gary Ballance as captain, who obviously initially came out and said that, they were good mates, etc., which I think Azeem Rafiq said they were at the start. But that slowly dissipated after the kind of discriminatory tendencies from Balance, where there's been a few allegations levied against him. One, the Kevin allegation, which is, calling anyone of color Kevin. And then obviously there's the Alex Hales thing, which Aaron Kent was talking about before, where it's the classic Alex Hales where he's obviously involved in it. And I think, there was an allegation that he called his black dog Kevin, because again, it's colored, which isn't great, of course, from anyone's point of view. But also, Azeem Rafiq has grown up in the system, in the England system, played international level at pretty much all age groups from what I know, up until I think it was under 19s. I think it was part of the under 19s. I think he captained the under 19s as well, if I'm not mistaken. But obviously hasn't got a full senior cap for England. So someone who's come through the system was actually captain at Yorkshire as well for a little bit, if I'm not mistaken. Again, So look, I mean, he's clearly, got some accomplishments to his name, but I think there's clearly something that's happened in his career, a few instances where it's derailed him a little bit and has definitely halted his progression. But I think, we all said this, and I think, you guys correct me if I'm wrong in your thoughts. I don't want to speak for you, but yes, this is an example of someone where they've clearly been discriminated against, but it's a widespread issue where not just, it's not just an isolated example of, this has happened to Azeem Rafiq, because since that's happened, multiple other players have come out and come forward to say, this is my experience. Obviously, a story, and then I'll go to Yarangan, that is definitely poignant in my head, because as someone who is British Pakistani and also Muslim as well. Boron Reese says, what's up, fellas? Very interested to hear your thoughts about this topic. I just heard about it today and know very little about it. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, do stay tuned. Matthew says, what's the reason behind the PCA handling it? Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second. Yeah, thank you. So I think generally, as someone who is British Pakistani myself, and I'm Muslim as well, one of the biggest stories that came out from that was, Gary Ballance saying, but he used to drink with us and drink heavily with us, etc. And it doesn't, as a community, and I can tell you from an Asian community, that's obviously frowned upon, especially if you're Muslim anyway. But he came out and said, look, I tried to fit in. And then at first I was like, that's not really the best excuse to come up with. But then he gave a story and it made me think, this is why. And the story, which I think you guys have all read it, but people that are listening might not have, is the story where he said at his cricket club when he was 15, he was pinned down and forced red wine down his throat. So to me, that was... I read that. I think it was on the train, actually, and my stomach just churned a little bit. Almost like... It hasn't happened to me, but, as someone who is, the same ethnicity, you just think, if that happened to me, how much of an effect it would have. And that's when I felt a lot of, I think, empathy for his situation. Not just that, he's been racist, but the examples that he came up with. Aaron, I'll chuck it to you because I don't want to hang up too much time as well. What have you found? I mean, what are your thoughts on it? It doesn't have to be anything specific, but what what have you gathered from the investigation? What's your kind of thoughts around it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing just completely stinks of arrogance and corruption, to be honest. It's interesting listening to Azeem Rafiq when he was giving evidence to the MPs, because as someone who'd played for Yorkshire for so long, he desperately wanted to fix it within Yorkshire, and they had so many opportunities to just do the right thing. And even like Cash said, even that statement that they put out, they could have very easily just fallen on their own sword, said, listen, this is historic racist abuse, it's happened, we have tried to grow as a club, but they used the word banter and they kind of threw that out there. And going on from that, we've had, you have connected people, Alex Hales, Gary Balance, even Michael Vaughan was dragged into it. And they've all sort of used this excuse of banter, him being their friend, but no one's actually apologized, or no one actually has gone out and said sorry. And it's a very easy and simple thing to do, but it's that feeling of entitlement within that community, within the Yorkshire team, and it stretches from the chairman all the way down, even to the first team players who probably thought they were bigger than the club. They thought they could keep Rafiq in the corner. It just stinks. It's corruption. It's just. And it kind of gives you an illustration of the mindset of what it's like to be in that dressing room. And the one thing that I was thinking about today actually was, in many ways, cricket is still a multicultural sport. So a lot of these international players, they're still going out, they're playing with Pakistani, Indian, Sri Lankan players. They're playing representing the national team. And as like a British Asian, for all of us, it definitely means a lot to see our countries represented on the international stage, and to see people who are from our backgrounds who are good at something. And I just can't help but feel how damaging this is going to be to the entire community. Like, why would you play? It's hard enough to be an international cricketer from that background, but why would you want to go and play for Yorkshire at this point?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think talking about, I think is probably quite a good segue to go into Michael Vaughan, because obviously Michael Vaughan, former Ashes winning captain, revered as being, well, really revolutionary at the time, winning the 2005 Ashes, which was, a huge win, and it definitely changed how cricket was perceived, I think, in that specific moment in history in English cricket. So, a lot of companies, BBC, for example, have taken him on board for commentating, and also their, and I think, and also that his views and his cricket knowledge is very good, no doubt. It's interesting because he's always been known as someone who's been quite clean. Like, he's had he tends to troll countries, etc., and like tongue in cheek and say some outlandish things, but it's never to do with being linked to racism or discrimination. It's all just, he'll make a crazy prediction, like, Bangladesh will be India, for example. And people say, what are you talking about? But he just likes the attention, right? He's more attention seeker than anything. But obviously it was Azeem Rafiq came out and said that it was himself, Adil Rashid, Rana Naveed, who played for Pakistan, and one other who I've forgotten off the top of my head. But there were 4 Asian players playing for Yorkshire at the time. And he turned around and said, oh, there's too many of you lot. We need to sort that out. Now, for me personally, and it's quite easy, obviously, because, it's quite easy for us to just say 100% that's true. Obviously, us sitting here, we don't know everything that Azeem Rafiq said. We don't know if it's 100% true. Sometimes when people recall stuff, it can be different. What I would say, however, though, is that when he comes up with these specific examples, for me, that normally indicates that it's true, because it's so specific. Like, the words that he said, he could have easily just said, you PAKIs, right? That's what he could have. That's how he could have recorded it. He could have made it really, like, theatrical, but he didn't. He just said, this is what he was said, and that, didn't feel good being said again. Racism isn't always just someone calling someone a name. It's saying it in a certain way, the subtleness of it, and it can be a bit passive as well in that way. And I think obviously that's what he was trying to get at. And at the time, Vaughn was like, no, 100% not happened. I completely deny it. And after that, who came out. It was Abdul Rashid said, yeah, I can remember him saying that. He said, I don't really want to get involved in the whole situation, but I can remember that. Yeah, so Adil's saying here, wasn't it Moin? So it wasn't Moin Ali. No, he doesn't play for Yorkshire. So it wasn't him. Thank you as well, Mohammed Hussain, Boring Reviews, and everyone else for tuning in. Hold on. Mohammed Hussain says, I was listening to Russia TV, and he said one thing which I think is absolutely right. He said white people always remain racist no matter what. They are proud of their color and they think others are. I disagree with that. I mean, I think obviously I think to brush everyone with, to paint everyone with one brush is wrong, and that's the whole point why we're in this place in the first place, is because people generalize and they have their own, perceived notions about certain people. We're all humans at the end of the day. That's the biggest thing. So, let's just take it. We've all three of us have got friends who are white, who are understanding. And yes, there may be some people, because they're white, their understanding of culture and color is not as good. That doesn't mean they're racist. And especially the ones that come out and they ask you and they've got an interest in it, it's clear, right, that their nature is not to be racist. I disagree with that. When you're born, just because you're white, your nature isn't just say, "Oh, we're racist." I disagree completely. But you're on the Michael Vaughn situation, so that's come out. That was a big one. He's completely denied it after even Abdul Rashid saying it as well, but he's now being investigated, etc. And then from that, a couple of other players have come out with their own stories. I think it was someone from the Yorkshire Academy, wasn't it? It came out. He got cut. Someone from Essex came out. So there's an investigation. Essex, to be fair, have been quite good. I'm pretty sure they put a proper investigation in place straight away. And I think it's only a matter of time until other players from different counties come out. And it'll be interesting to see what happens and who gets implicated. We'll go a little bit more into the specific players in the Yorkshire dressing room. But Cash, what do you think of the Vaughn situation?
The Vaughn thing's interesting. He obviously he has a history to some degree of Islamophobia. There are tweets about him saying Moeen Ali should go out. Have you seen this? Moeen Ali should go out and make sure Muslim kids are not radicalized. This was in 2012 or something. It was a very long time ago, and he didn't delete it, so he's clearly somehow proud of it. So that he does have a bit of a track record, and but like you said, he's always been a bit of a attention seeker and whatever. What's interesting about him, and for people who don't know, Yorkshire for about 40 years or so, they didn't allow anyone who was not born in Yorkshire to play for Yorkshire from the 60s until the 90s. And Vaughn was the first player they let in because he was actually born in near Manchester. He was born in Lancashire, and they changed the rules for him so that if you were educated in Yorkshire, you could play for Yorkshire. And he was educated in Yorkshire, and they let him in, and he became a Yorkshire legend and an England legend. But what that shows you, of course, is that there's an entrenched kind of even Yorkshireism about Yorkshire. It's a specifically bad place, possibly, you can argue. It's specifically, is not used to outsiders. Then make them, and then all of a sudden you have these Asian kids who are born and bred in Yorkshire, and it's we're seeing issues, right? And one of the really revealing things about what came out was they were talking about how they wouldn't allow over a certain number of Asian players in each youth team. So I don't know how many it was, maybe it's 2 or 3, but in each kind of 11, there was only meant to be this number.
It's a quota system, isn't it?
Effectively a quota system, but a quota system
a reverse
to keep them
quota
down.
system.
Yeah, a reverse quota system, right? Because actually, the reality is you could have whole teams of 6, 7, probably Asian players, and the whole team could have been at least on youth level. So you're seeing that actually how that's feeding into the whole system. So dozens and dozens, and if you're going through every county, hundreds of kids aren't getting through the years. It's not to say each one's going to be the next Abdul Rashid or whatever, but it is to say they could be, and they shouldn't be treated badly just because they're not going to be most talented. Sorry, they're not going to be the top, but So that's a very revealing thing, because what that then does for me, it says, okay, it's not just about the offensive remark or the offensive thought. It's actually having a material effect on people.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, I think, where that's where racism then is structural versus racism is just some words, right?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Very deep. I had to follow that up, to be fair. Aaron, what about you? I mean, are you surprised about some of the stories that come out about the specific players as well? I mean, Gary Balance seems like quite a timid person, really. I mean, the interviews he's done, and as a player as well, seems quite calm and timid. But obviously, it seems anyway from the allegations, again, like, you know, we can't say 100% because we weren't there. We're not him. You know, what do you think? I mean, apparently it's at the start himself and Azeem Rafiq were outsiders because obviously Gary Balance is from South African heritage, if I'm not mistaken. So he wasn't accepted. A little bit how...
I think Zimbabwean.
Oh, Zimbabwean. Sorry, you're right. Yeah, Zimbabwean. Yeah, sorry, my mistake. Yeah, Zimbabwean heritage. So obviously a similar but not the same situation as KP, who's South African heritage, who obviously has brought up issues in the past. I'm sure it's only a matter of time until KP comes out. I don't know if he has yet, but I'm sure he will. He loves to chime in and give his views, which is always interesting. But yeah, I think, you know, so himself and Azeem Rafiq, heritage, not from the UK. At first, they were kind of outsiders. Clearly, you know, Gary Balance got himself into what can be only causing in a circle, can captain, etc. as well. How do you see that? Do you see it as, oh, that's pretty surprising, they're good mates and he's kind of now, you know, he's become one of the guys, or is it that's pretty normal for that to happen because he wants to make sure that he has, one, control of the dressing room, and two, feels like he's actually part of the team?
I think it's I think it's complicated. So I suppose the difficulty with when these guys have come out and called Rafiq their friend is it's a very one-sided thing. So Rafiq himself tried to stay quiet so then he could say everything at the appropriate place and time at the DCMS. To put out a statement and say, "Oh, he was my friend and I was making these comments," it doesn't really say that much. And I guess if they truly had a bond, then if Rafiq would have been able to say, "Listen, this is bothering me." Even Pujara at one stage actually brought up the whole Steve thing and said, "Look, I don't like to be called this." It, you know,
Did he? So
yeah.
what has he come out himself and said it?
So he said it. So Pujara said that he, as a joke in one of these interviews on YouTube or something, they call me Steve. But
Interesting. So it's
Rafiq did
true. So
say
okay,
that
so
Pujara did come out. Yeah.
wow. Okay, thank you. No, I didn't
Yeah.
know that. So interesting. So he's basically confirmed it, and obviously he would have joked about it in the interview, but the fact that he's brought up means that it's bothered him, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Sorry,
and I feel like these type of things is interesting. I think it was either Matthew Hoggard or Tim Breslin who brought it up, and they said they were sorry, and if they knew that it was having an impact, they wouldn't have done it. Which, I mean, it's tricky, but I think some of what Balance has said in terms of the severity of what he was saying, and he kept on being named over and over again, it's probably him trying to take control of the dressing room. And the ultimate thing is, I mean, we look at these guys, it hasn't really harmed their career. Alex Hales has gone on to play for England, Balance has gone on to play for England, Breslin went on to play for England, Hoggard did, Michael Vaughn is already a legend, he's got all these commentary gigs. The only person who was actually harmed by it was Rafiq. And you know, you sort of wonder if all of this had come out 10 years ago, what it would have done for the game. And it's just a bit, if you try and draw parallels with different sports, like imagine this happening at Premier League Football Club right now. It's crazy, right? Even 10 years ago, it's crazy. But there's definitely that kind of insulated culture around Yorkshire. To some extent, you know, you always get this type of banter between players. People always say politically incorrect things. Even Rafiq himself has been caught out in terms of comments he's made on social media. And I guess, you know, this sort of clean cut image, even with Michael Vaughan, everyone has these skeletons in their closets. Everyone said something which is offensive to someone before. But it's more the mindset, as Cash said, you know, you have young players that aren't getting opportunities. You have coaches that are looking the other way. You have a board that is trying to sweep it under the carpet. I think for me, the surprising element was just how far up it went. And the fact that it wasn't just a few people, it was prominent international players doing it as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a good avenue for us to go into a little bit into representation of not just Asians but coloured people in cricket at grassroots level and international level, county level, etc. So I think I'm pretty sure I've got the figures correct, but if I'm wrong, please do correct me. So from what I know, so I think that's just in Yorkshire. In Yorkshire, there's the amount of people that are Asian that are playing at grassroots level is 30%. And then representation at county level is 4%. So there's a huge disparity there. Part of that is obviously to do with the system potentially, and I would imagine there is some type of discrimination in place, or I think discriminate, but some type of bias in place. Conscious or unconscious, or subconscious, or even. And on top of that, there's also a tendency for some Asian players to end up just playing Sunday league cricket with their mates because they're not happy with how they're being treated at their clubs. I can speak from experience when I say that I know some players, and I don't play, obviously, county cricket, but I play Surrey League cricket. And I know some Asian players who have moved clubs because they haven't been happy. And they, for example, been at a club when they've been playing third 11 cricket, when they're way too good to be playing third 11 cricket, but they're seen as they're just basically told you not good enough. And then they move to another club and they end up playing first 11 cricket, and then exactly the same, it's exactly the same standard. So I think that kind of says a little bit about it. And I don't want to go too much into that. If we've got time, I might touch upon mine, but I think that's not really important right now. What's important is about looking at how it is perceived at grassroots level. How can that change? I mean, Cash, what do you think? I mean, what needs to be done to change it? Because clearly it is some sort of issue. Obviously, people like Moeen Ali, Adil Rashid have helped the cause. Tymon Mills, Chris Jordan, Jofra Archer, of course. It's not just Asians; it's just people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think there should be I personally don't think there should be a quota system. I just think in an ideal world, which you don't live in an ideal world, you just get picked on merit and you'd pick your team who's the best. And that's, obviously how most people think it should work. But the only problem is that as you're going up through your youth age groups, is that there's always some type of bias. The parents are the coach, or, a coach, deep down has some kind of unseen bias that, that ends up coming out in the end, and it affects that person's then career trajectory towards getting to the top. Is it just a case of education?
English cricket is an institution, isn't it? It's a very big institution. It has a long history. And a lot of its history is bound up in being effectively a colonial power, right? That's why cricket went to certain countries and it didn't go to others, right? On a basic level. The question is how much has reformed over time, and one level that's institutional thing. That's like, okay, who's running it? Who's in the ECB, who's the coaches, who's that. The other side of that is the cultures of it, right? Which is what you're talking about, which is how are you brought through the system, And so those two things come together, right? How are you brought through the system, how you're treated in the system, and what you need to do to get by. And there's so many anecdotes, and I think we all have anecdotes about actually you needed to act in this way to get to the next stage. Actually, you needed to do like this to get to the next stage. And of course, that will always affect people who are outsiders more. And then that has harsher effects on people who may be brown skin or black skin than it would do on someone from Zimbabwe, a white person from Zimbabwe or something, or a KP or whatever. I think you know, like even someone like Moeen Ali, right? He moved county because he wasn't getting picked, right? He moved from Warwickshire to Worcestershire quite early on, and I think he's been pretty. It's pretty obvious what he felt was the problem. And you look at someone like Adil Rashid, and you go, why? Okay, you know he was a test match spinner. He gave up red ball cricket. Okay, it wasn't going 100%, but he was in the first team for a lot of, you know, for certain tours and so on. And he gave it all up, right? He gave up the county game as well. And you go, okay, one of the contributing factors, at least to me, and I'm speculating, is must be this, right? One of the contributing factors. Another contributing factor will be, okay, he's doing really well in T20.
Yeah, shoulder, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, and the shoulder and everything. But, you know,
Well,
it doesn't look great.
I think a good example is Moeen Ali.
Mm.
Because you make a good point, and I think actually it's even more poignant for Moeen Ali in the Test arena
Yeah.
retiring. I don't think he would have retired as early, and he came out, didn't he, after, and he said that it wasn't ideal that I got shunted up and down the order. And it's funny, Ushtred said in our you know, we got our cricket chat. He said to Aaron on their podcast, check it out, Counter Cricketer, happy to call it out, that when Moeen Ali was picked at first and he was playing at 7, where he'd never batted, right, in the longer format. So for Worcestershire, he was always in the top 5, if I'm not mistaken. The first thing that came into his head was that's probably discrimination. Now, people might think, oh, that is such a ridiculous conclusion to get to. Like, why would he even think that? I think the issue is that maybe you're right initially, but I think the reason why we get to that conclusion is because it is so prevalent and it does end up happening a lot. And then our initial thoughts end up actually having some type of substance to it. And I think we saw that on Moeen Ali with the fact that he was shunted up and down the order all the time. I don't want to get into intricacies, but obviously he was. He said after he wasn't particularly happy about that. But, you know, he was kind of like a good soldier, got on with it, and he seems like a very nice guy. So the fact that he came out and had some type of grievance with it definitely indicates to me that it bothered him. And he doesn't really seem like the type of person to kick up a fuss. So it shows that it definitely was big enough for him to, like, it was playing on his mind even after he retired, which is interesting. I just actually I wanted to mention this because I think, you know, I said about Hoggard and I didn't really mention the specifics. So I'll just briefly talk about that, and then we'll maybe make one more point and go through the comments. There's a few of them. So Rafiq said that Hoggard apologized, right? So he's the one player that has come out and apologized specifically to Rafiq. So fair play to him, obviously. And I think this just not, I don't want to damn his character. It's more just an example of what was happening at that time at Yorkshire. So he said Hoggard apologized for comments that include calling him a PAKI, elephant washer, and for telling his teammate and other players of colour, you lot sit over there. He would also call him Rafa the Kafir, which is obviously an ethnic slur used in South Africa. And apparently Tim Bresnan as well frequently made racist comments to him and 6 or 7 other players who also made complaints about the former Test star, which is, yeah, like quite big because obviously they both played for England for a number of years. Tim Bresnan a bit more recent than Hoggard, but Hoggard part of the 2005 Ashes. Hoggard's come out and apologised, so I think it's worth us obviously saying that. In terms of Tim Bresnan, I haven't heard anything in terms of Tim Bresnan, so I'm not sure. Warwickshire said they'd speak to that. Tim Bresnan said he apologises for bullying, but categorically denies it, actually. Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. So we'll see. I mean, that's, yeah, a lot of people have denied it. We'll see, I guess, how it comes about. But yeah. To finish up on that, I guess, you know, and I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention that obviously he's also been pulled up, Azeem Rafiq, recently for anti-Semitic remarks. I think he made when he was 19. That's why I've been a little bit cautious on talking about what they just said on Twitter. And I know Michael Vaughn, for example, said that not the best of things to say, of course. But I'm more interested in what people have done in person, because if you're able to say it in person, it shows that that's a true character of who you are. I think on Twitter, people, when they're silly and stupid and they're young, they can do it. And we've seen that with multiple of the England players who have had to apologise, etc. in the past. Not to say it's right. It's not right. Of course not. We know that. But, there's been a lot of examples, and people are young and they do stupid things, and that doesn't necessarily reflect their actual beliefs or how they are right now. So I think it's important. And again, that's why Michael Vaughn, we're not saying Michael Vaughn's a racist. We're not saying Matthew Hogarth's a racist. We're not saying Tim Breslin is a racist. We're not saying any of these guys are racist. What we're trying to say is that there is a nature, an institutional nature in cricket, it seems, of racism. It doesn't necessarily mean it's one person. It doesn't necessarily mean it's everyone. It just means it looks like it's widespread from what not just Azeem Rafiq said, but it seems to have snowballed into other people coming out with their own experiences. And I'm sure that will only continue. And clearly it's something that needs to be addressed. Cash, what would you do? I'll go to you, Aaron, after as well. But Cash first, what would you do in terms of if you're the ECB right now? What's your plan of action going forward? It can be the short term, medium term, long term, like kind of whatever you want.
Well, I wouldn't just be making useless statements, which is what they seem to be doing at the moment. I don't know if you've seen this, but they recently released another one, like in the last hour or two.
Okay.
They had a meeting with PCA, the NCCA, and they basically just said, racism is bad. and they've released a statement. MCC as well there. And it's, there needs to be material actions. One of the things, that they always talked about was, they do these diversity drives and they claim, we're trying to get kids involved. And it's actually, there are lots of kids involved. We know that. We know there are loads of, particularly Asian, I can talk about Asian community. I don't know about Black community as much. But Asian community, we know there's huge interest at grassroots level to play cricket and to play, to a certain level at least. And we know that they're not getting through. So that's what needs to be looked at. It needs, whether it's a massive overhaul or if it's just personnel being changed, something. I'm not close enough in that circle to say these are the specific reforms that need to be done. But there does need to be big reforms done, and probably there needs to be a change of leadership as well, right? And this is what Tom Harrison is still there, right? And people are saying he should be resigning, and then that might be a sign. Yorkshire, they got rid of the previous chairman. I forget the name.
Yeah.
He finally went, and this Lord Patel's come in, and he's come in and he sorted the employment tribunal out with Azeem in 3 days, in 72 hours. And they seem to be on good terms, and I hope that they include Azeem in the club going forward, because he has said he's a Yorkshire person. He's a Yorkshireman through and through. He wants there, and he doesn't want. And I don't think any of us want Yorkshire Cricket Club to disappear or anything, because we do want to see all those kids and all those people still playing and still being involved. But at the moment, that they're not being really served by the club, right? And so there has to be massive changes, and it's going to be a rocky road. That's the issue.
Yeah, agreed. Most say we need to wait and see about other countries before saying the whole of cricket is institutionally racist. I don't think the whole of cricket is. I think it's English cricket. I think I'm okay to say that because from the stories, and if the stories are true, which I'm going to assume they are because there's been other people confirming, it looks like England. It filtered through to the England dressing room. That's what it seems like. So if that's the case, then that's other people from other counties. It doesn't sound like anyone came out and you stopped it. That's not, again, to say everyone's racist, but it's just to say that people are bystanding. Root's part of that Yorkshire dressing room, and he hasn't said anything specifically, but from what it seems like, if even half the stuff is true, Root would have been there for some of it. Now, that's not to say he's racist, not to say he's even part of it. But if he's standing by, it means that it's quite normal. And again, yes, that was at Yorkshire, but I'm pretty sure And Matthew, I can tell you from experience, I know people that have come through not just Yorkshire, but I'm here in Surrey, and people who come through the Surrey system, for example, varying ages, where there's been a clear bias. And that doesn't just happen in a couple of age groups, it filters through to the senior team. And I can tell you that is the case because there are examples of it. And quickly then from you as well, I mean, what do you think in terms of going forward?
I think in terms of going forward, it's tricky. Everyone's entitled to make mistakes. Everyone's entitled to apologize. A lot of the people there's undoubtedly a lot of good work that's going on by specific individuals at the ECB or at Yorkshire. They may believe in these grassroots programs, so they may feel that they're doing something, but as an institution, it looks like things are clearly wrong. I think when you look at it from the point of view as sport or cricket in the UK, what is the example that we're sending out to other countries and to kids? If you're a kid growing up watching cricket, you want to feel that if you're good enough, you'll get into the England team. And, to be honest, probably even the last time it will be based on talent alone is probably in your school team. And then once you start getting into the counties, as Cash said, there will be a bottleneck, there's a clear bias. And a lot of people just get put off the game completely. And I think if you look at it from that perspective in terms of what the message is and generating interest in sport, you have to be severe with this kind of thing. I don't think people can stay connected to that institution, can stay connected to Yorkshire or the ECB if there's even a question mark, because it's the game that we all love and that's why we have to protect it. So I think if it means the ECB chairman has to go, he has to go. If it means everyone in Yorkshire, a lot of people in Yorkshire have to lose their job because of the racism thing, I think they should, because the ultimate thing is we want to keep on going with the love of cricket.
Well, that's well said. That's well said. We're just going to wrap it up here, guys. Thank you for tuning in. I'll go through some of the comments because obviously I can see some of them are just you guys having a discussion in the chat, so I'll go through those. Yeah, the PCA it's not ideal, but that's why I think, as Cash said, they had a different tribunal, which is probably ideal.
Well, they even said they didn't have the resources. That was their.
Well, at least they're honest about it. To be fair, yeah, I've gone through all of this. Yeah, I mean, so this is. I will say this. I mean, obviously, this is Nick from Cricket for Americans saying that any group of people or race will always be racist is a silly comment. Agreed. If we don't feel that way, there'll always be white racists for sure, but not all white people. And well said. Yep, agreed. Yeah, that's fine. Abdullah says racism is taught. I wouldn't blame the racists only. The culture takes a huge blame too. And that's the thing. Exactly. You're right. It's a cultural issue for sure. And I think education is a huge part of that. Getting educated and also making sure that people realize it's wrong. Because if they don't know it's wrong, then how they stop doing it? They won't. I don't think it's normal. Right? So, yeah. Yeah, that's true as well. Nick's saying we live in a society now where people are willing to talk about it and comes to terms. Guys, chime in if you have any strong views on it. And I was just saying it's good to speak about this, even if it's a difficult topic to speak about. Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he says I think certain things are inherently wrong, so there should always be consequences. And I think he's talking about the system, if I'm not mistaken. This is interesting. Matthew says I don't think 10 years ago this would have happened with black players, but for some reason with Asian players it was deemed acceptable. I think that's probably to do with the history that black people have had in the past. I think maybe. But in saying that, if you look in America, for example, it's very different, and I think that's why there was all the Black Lives Matter movement, right? It kind of stemmed from that. So I wouldn't, this is why I say, we're all human, and it doesn't matter how we get there, but whether you're black, you're Asian, you're black, brown, whatever, white, it doesn't matter what color you are. We need to be treated all respectfully, I think, is the main thing. So it says, guys, please like the stream and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, Satak. Benny says, what do you think of England starting a South African-based selection system? I think all of us disagree with that. Because I think if you go that way, then the problem is how South Africa have the issue at the moment. I would hope that England are not in the position that South Africa were in the past. That it's not that bad. I'm hoping that we can make sure we don't get to that stage. So let's see, for sure. Matthew says, I think times are very different now. This was like 10 years ago, completely different. Comparing them to now is just silly. Times have changed. What was accepted then are not anymore.
But we saw
it wasn't
in
10 years ago, though. It wasn't 10 years ago, Matthew, as well. So he didn't just talk about when he was 19. So it happened in the last 5-6 years. Some of the stuff that happened. That's not that long ago. And 10 years ago, if it's done in person, it is like tweets and stuff. Forget about that. I'm talking about stuff that's happened in person, and we're talking about stuff that's not just happening 10 years ago. We're talking about 4, 5, 6 years ago, right? It's not that long ago, and I can tell you now, Matthew, that it happens. Like it's happened to me, and in the last few years, it's happened to other people I know in the last few years. Not just that county, and it's happened at club level. I know it has happened to other people at club level that I've talked to.
Yeah, and you can say the fact is Yorkshire Cricket Club were accepting it because they weren't doing anything about it. You know, they knew.
You can't exactly 100%. You can't say that it's not accepted anymore because if it was accepted now, they would have just released it all and said, "Oh, we're fine." They didn't. They said it. Oh, it's fine. We've done our investigation, but we're not going to release it. Matthew says, "Yeah, go on."
10 years ago, we still had a black president. 2011 is still quite progressive. It wouldn't have been. It wouldn't have been okay.
It's not 50 years ago. Matthew D'Souza says class is still a big issue in cricket. Agreed. I think classes as well. It's a separate discussion. I wouldn't say it's as big an issue as race personally, but it is still an issue, no doubt. And I think we will do a video on that because talking about the private and public sector in cricket is a big one. And we'll talk about Tim Payne in a different video for sure. And you heard George DeBella have. Matthew Dobby says, thanks for replying. Great points. No problem at all. Thanks all for joining. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I need to go. Guys, are you okay to wrap up, or is there anything that you need to talk about?
No? I think we're done.
To be honest, there's probably a lot that we haven't touched upon. So maybe if we have more developments, maybe we'll do this in a week or two's time, potentially do another one like this for about 45 minutes to an hour as well. Maybe get some more people on as well. Thank you very much, guys. Stay safe and well, and we'll see you on the next video. Thank you very much.